Imagine the blistering summer of 1878 in the unforgiving Arizona desert. A quiet white widow named Margaret Hale, barely surviving on odd jobs after her husband's mysterious murder, stumbles upon faint, desperate groans rising from a half-buried cellar amid the scorching sands. Peering inside, her blood runs cold. The feared Comanche leader Tall Bear, whom the whole town celebrates as dead, is locked in a brutal iron cage, whipped and chained, a living message of terror to his people. In that split second of raw horror, one burning question hits. Will this broken woman, haunted by the same ruthless greed that took her husband, walk away to save herself? Or defy everything to set him free? This true edge-of-your-seat story builds to an ending that has left millions in tears. Profound, heartbreaking, and unforgettable. You have to hear it all the way through. If you're already hooked, smash that subscribe button for more gripping tales like this. Comment below. What city or country are you watching from? Rate it 0-10 at the end, and let's see if you guess the twist. Stay till the finish. You won't believe what happens next. Let's begin. The summer of 1878 gripped Arizona territory in a merciless fist. Red Willow baked under a sun that turned the air into shimmering glass, and every breath tasted of hot dust and iron. The town clung to the edge of the desert like a scab that refused to heal. Wooden sidewalks warped, horses standing hip-shot in thin shade, and men moving slow, as if the heat itself might pull triggers if they hurried. Margaret Hale stepped out of her sagging cabin just after dawn, the door creaking behind her like an old warning. 30 years old, widowed 2 seasons now, she carried the weight of loss in the set of her shoulders and the steady gray of her eyes. Her husband James had died out on the range, shot in the back during what the sheriff called a land dispute gone sour. No arrests followed, no questions asked, just a pine box and a promise from the big ranchers that the trouble with the Comanche was finally over. She earned her keep washing blood-stained shirts for cowhands and currying horses for the stage line. Most days, she kept her gaze on the ground, speaking only when spoken to. Silence had become her armor. Yet every time the wind carried the faint smell of sage and distant rain, memory stabbed her. James arguing late into the night about treaties broken, water holes poisoned, families driven off land their grandfathers had hunted since the buffalo ran thick. That afternoon, the heat pressed harder than usual, a heavy hand on the back of the neck. Margaret walked the dry arroyo beyond the abandoned ranch, hunting for mesquite branches dry enough to burn. The old Hale place had once stood here before fire, and raid emptied it. Now only chimney stones and rusted wagon rims marked the spot. She moved carefully, boots scuffing red dust, rifle slung but unloaded. Bullets cost money. A faint metallic clink stopped her cold. Not the wind rattling tin, not a snake on sheet metal. It came again, deliberate, followed by a low rasp that might have been breath or pain. The sound rose from the half-buried grain cellar cut into the arroyo bank, its plank door warped and half hidden by blowing sand. Margaret's pulse kicked hard. Raiders sometimes cached stolen stock in places like this. Or worse, Apache scouts left warnings no white person wanted to find. She eased the rifle forward, thumbed a cartridge into the chamber, and crept closer. Heat radiated from the ground in waves. Sweat stung her eyes. Another clink, sharper this time, and beneath it a muffled groan that carried the weight of a man fighting to stay alive. She crouched at the door, heart hammering against her ribs. Through a finger-wide gap between warped boards, thin blades of light cut into darkness. Dust motes drifted like slow smoke. Then she saw the shape. A human form folded inside something that caught and threw back the light in dull gleams. Iron bars, railroad ties, old trace chains welded rough and cruel. The groan came again, deeper, edged with defiance rather than surrender. Margaret leaned closer, shielding her eyes from glare. The figure shifted, and for an instant, the light struck a proud profile she knew from wanted posters nailed outside the saloon. High cheekbones, braided hair streaked with gray. The unmistakable bearing of Tall Bear, the Comanche war leader every rancher in Red Willow swore was already dead and buried. Her breath caught. The town had celebrated for 3 days when word came that Tall Bear fell in a running fight near the salt flats. Bonfires, free whiskey, men slapping each other on the back. Yet here he was, caged like a wild animal beneath their feet, waiting for whoever had built this prison to return and finish the job. Margaret's hand tightened on the rifle stock. "Turn away now," a voice whispered, and no one would ever know she'd been here. "Walk back to town, keep washing shirts, keep breathing." But another voice, James's voice, rose louder. "They'll come for the rest if no one stands witness." The chained man inside the cellar lifted his head, sensing her presence. Even through the gap, his eyes burned, fierce and unbowed. A thin line of fresh blood traced down his temple where iron had bitten skin. He said nothing, but the question hung in the thick air between them. "Will you leave me here to die?" Margaret felt the desert wind shift, carrying the distant howl of a coyote and the promise of nightfall not far off. Whoever had done this would ride back before dark to make certain their message stuck. Time was bleeding away faster than the heat. She lowered the rifle, drew the small skinning knife James had carried, and pressed its tip against the rusted padlock. The metal felt warm, almost alive. One chance, one cut, one choice that could end with her own body added to the cellar floor. The lock gave a tired click under pressure, and the chain rattled like a warning. Margaret froze, listening. Only the wind answered. She pushed the door wider, dust cascading from the frame, and stepped into the stifling dark where the caged man waited. Still breathing, still unbroken, and now watching her with eyes that held both suspicion and the faintest spark of impossible hope. The door groaned open on leather hinges baked stiff by years of sun, and Margaret slipped into the cellar's choking dark. Heat trapped inside hit her like a furnace blast. The air stank of blood, sweat, and human waste. Her eyes adjusted slowly, picking out the crude cage hammered together from discarded railroad ties, old wagon wheels, and heavy trace chains meant for oxen. Tall Bear sat hunched in the center, wrists raw where iron cuffs had bitten deep. Fresh whip marks crisscrossed his bare back, some still weeping dark beads that caught the thin light like obsidian. Yet when he raised his head, the defiance in his gaze struck her harder than any blow. This was no broken prisoner begging mercy. This was a man who had already decided how he would die. He studied her in silence for a long moment, reading the rifle in her hands, the knife at her belt, the dust on her skirt. "White woman," he said at last, voice rough as gravel dragged across stone. "You come to watch the sport, or to finish it quicker?" The question carried no fear, only cold calculation, and it chilled her more than the desert night ever could. Margaret's throat tightened. She had expected pleas, curses, anything but that calm challenge. Outside, the wind moaned over the arroyo rim, carrying faint laughter from Red Willow saloons, celebrating the Comanche leader's supposed death. The irony twisted like a blade in her gut. While men toasted his end with whiskey, he waited here for the real killing. She knelt just beyond the bars, close enough to see the fever glaze in his eyes, yet far enough that he couldn't lunge if strength returned. "They told the town you were dead," she said quietly. "Shot clean near the salt flats." Tall Bear's mouth curved in a bitter half-smile that revealed blood on his teeth. "Dead men don't bleed slow enough for their pleasure. This cage is for teaching lessons. A sudden clatter of loose chain made her flinch. He had tested the cuffs again, deliberately, as if reminding her how little time remained. They ride back tonight, he continued. 3, maybe 4, lanterns and rifles. Want the body fresh for photographs. Proof to show Washington the land is safe for cattle now. His words landed like stones in still water, rippling through her mind with images of posed corpses and land deeds signed in Washington ink. Margaret glanced toward the open door. Sunset bled across the sky in violent orange. Soon, riders would come. She could still walk out, pull the plank shut, let the desert swallow this secret along with her conscience. But something in his unflinching stare demanded honesty. "If I open this," she said, "they'll hunt us both." He nodded once, slowly. "Then hunt they will, but I will not die kneeling in their iron." A dry cough rattled in his chest, spraying flecks of blood onto the dirt floor, and for the first time, pain cracked the mask. Margaret saw the fever-winning ground. Without water and care, he might not last till moonrise, caged or free. Footsteps crunched faintly outside, wind shifting sand or riders already scouting. She rose swiftly, heart slamming against bone. The cellar felt smaller now, walls pressing in with the weight of every choice she'd avoided since James's grave. Knife ready, she moved to the gate, fingers finding the crude padlock forged from wagon tire. New iron, still bright where hammer blows had shaped it. Tall Bear dragged himself upright using the bars, chains clinking like death bells. His eyes never left hers, daring her forward. Margaret inserted the knife tip, feeling for the mechanism, sweat stinging her eyes. Metal scraped metal. Somewhere above, a horse whickered in the distance, closer than before. Time narrowed to the pressure under her blade, and the ragged breathing of the man waiting to see if a white widow would choose mercy over survival. The lock gave with a sharp snap that echoed like a gunshot in the confined space. Chain slithered to the floor. Tall Bear pushed the gate wide and stepped out, swaying but unbroken, blood and dust streaking his skin like war paint renewed. For one suspended instant, they stood face to face. Captor turned rescuer, enemy turned witness, and the desert wind rushed in through the open door, carrying the unmistakable thud of approaching hooves. The dust from their ponies' hooves still hung in the air when the first rifle shot cracked across the canyon, splintering rock inches from Margaret's head. She ducked low over the animal's neck, urging it faster along the narrow trail old Joseph had pointed out, before turning back to cover their retreat. Tall Bear clung behind her, arms locked around her waist, his blood soaking through her shirt in warm pulses. 3 riders burst into view on the ridge above, Harlan Pike leading, hat brim low, and Winchester already levering another round. "Cut 'em off at the spring," he shouted to the others, voice carrying clear on the dry wind. Margaret recognized the second man, young Cole Brennan, barely 20, who'd once tipped his hat to her in town. Now his face was hard as saddle leather, eyes fixed on the Comanche at her back. The trail dipped into a maze of sandstone fins, where shadows sliced the ground like knife blades. Margaret guided the pony hard left, following a faint Apache sign old Joseph had scratched on rock years ago. Bullets whined past, kicking up geysers of red dust. One tugged at her sleeve, burning a hot line across her arm. Tall Bear's grip tightened. "Faster," he rasped. "They know this country too." She pushed the pony mercilessly, hooves clattering over loose shale that threatened to spill them both. Behind, the hunters fanned out, cutting angles like wolves working a lame deer. A second volley echoed. The pony screamed as a slug clipped its flank, stumbling but somehow keeping its feet. Blood flecked Margaret's cheek. Not hers, not yet. They broke into a narrow defile choked with ocotillo and prickly pear, thorns raking skin like claws. The spring lay ahead, a dark seep at the base of a cliff, ringed by cottonwoods gone silver in drought. Margaret slid from the saddle before the pony stopped, pulling Tall Bear down with her. He hit the ground hard, coughing blood into the dirt, but waved off her help. "Water first, then fight!" She dragged him behind a fallen trunk, while the pony bolted away, panicked. Hooves thundered closer. Pike's voice rang out again, closer now. "I see tracks. They're holed up at the seep." Margaret checked James's old Colt. 4 rounds left, cylinder sticky with dust. Tall Bear drew a short skinning knife from his boot, the only weapon he'd carried into the cage. Cole Brennan appeared first on foot, rifle raised, moving cautiously between the trees. Margaret sighted down the barrel, finger trembling on the trigger. He was young enough to have a mother waiting supper, yet he hunted a wounded man for pay. She eased off, shifted aim, and fired high. Bark exploded beside his head, driving him to cover. The shot bought seconds, nothing more. Pike and the third rider dismounted, spreading wide. "Come out, Mrs. Hale," Pike called, mock polite. "We just want the savage. No need for a widow to bleed today." The lie hung thick as the heat. Margaret reloaded from her belt, hands steady, now that the choice was gone. Tall Bear met her eyes. "When they close, I stand," he said quietly. "You run." "No," she answered, voice flat. "We both stand, or neither does." A grim smile touched his cracked lips, the first since the cage. Then Pike stepped into the open, rifle leveled, and the spring exploded into gunfire. If the chase has your blood running hot as it has mine, do me a favor and hit subscribe right now. These desert pursuits only get fiercer from here. Bullets tore splinters from the log as Margaret returned fire, dropping the third rider with a lucky shot to the leg. He screamed, clutching his knee, rolling behind the rock. Pike cursed and retreated, dragging his man, but Cole circled left, trying to flank. Tall Bear rose suddenly, knife ready, using the trunk for support. Fever made him sway, yet he moved forward into the open, drawing fire to himself. "Here I am," he shouted, voice carrying the old war cry. Shots hammered the air. One spun him half around, blood blooming dark on his side. Margaret screamed his name without thinking, levering the Colt dry. Silence fell, broken only by the wounded man's groans. Smoke drifted lazily over the spring. Pike's voice came again, farther off now. "We'll be back with more, squaw lover. This ain't finished." Hooves retreated, fading into the vastness. Margaret crawled to Tall Bear. He lay on his back, staring at the merciless sky, chest rising shallow but steady. She pressed a hand to the new wound, tears cutting tracks through dust on her face. "Why?" she demanded. He turned his head, eyes still fierce. "Because someone must show them. Fear runs both ways." Far off, vultures began to circle, black specks against the brassy sun, waiting to see who the desert would claim next. The vultures wheeled higher as the sun climbed, black specks stitching lazy circles into the brassy sky, patient for whichever body the desert chose today. Margaret pressed a fresh bandage against Tall Bear's side, her hands slick with his blood, while he lay propped against the cottonwood trunk, watching the horizon with eyes that refused to dim. Distant dust rose in thin columns, riders returning, more this time. She counted 8, maybe 10, spreading wide like a dragnet across the flats. Harlan Pike rode point, hat white with alkali, and beside him sat the rancher himself, Elias Crawford, owner of half the water holes in the county. Word had spread fast. The prize was too big to leave to hired hands alone. Margaret's stomach knotted. 4 bullets left in the Colt, no spare cartridges, and Tall Bear too weak to run farther. The spring seeped slowly behind them, barely enough for one canteen. She scanned the cliff face for cover. Broken ledges, shallow overhangs, nothing that would stop a determined posse. "They'll bottle us here till we bake or surrender," she said low. Tall Bear pushed himself upright, grimacing as the wound pulled. "No surrender," he answered, voice thin but edged. "Better bullets than a cage again." He scanned the riders, then pointed with his chin toward a narrow chimney in the sandstone. "Old trail up there. Apache escaped once. Steep, but the horse can't follow." Hope flickered, faint as heat shimmer. She helped him stand, slinging his arm over her shoulder. They moved slowly along the base of the cliff, keeping to the shadow where the rock baked cooler than open sand. Bullets began to snap overhead as the posse closed the last mile. Lead spanged off stone, showering them with chips sharp as hornets. Margaret felt a slice on her cheek, warm blood trickling. The chimney mouth loomed, barely wide enough for a man sideways, footing treacherous with loose scree. She went first, testing each hold, then reached down to haul Tall Bear after. His weight dragged at her arms. Twice he slipped, boots scraping, sending pebbles rattling down like warnings. Halfway up, a shout rose below. Pike had spotted the climb. Rifles cracked in volley. Bullets whined through the slot, ricocheting wildly. One tugged Tall Bear's braid as it passed. Another shattered rock beside Margaret's hand, numbing her fingers. She hauled harder, lungs burning, until they spilled over the lip onto a narrow bench hidden from below. For a moment, they lay gasping, sky vast and indifferent above. But the bench ended at a sheer drop on three sides, 30 feet of blank sandstone down to jagged boulders. No trail out, only a dead end masked by scrub cedar. Margaret's heart sank cold. They had traded open ground for a trap tighter than the cage. Below, voices echoed up the chimney as men began to climb, boots scraping, spurs jingling. Tall Bear leaned against the rock, blood soaking the new bandage black. "End of run," he said quietly, almost relieved. Margaret shook her head hard. "Not yet." She studied the cedar clinging to cracks, thick trunk, roots biting deep. An idea sparked desperation. She drew the skinning knife and began hacking rope-thin branches, lashing them with strips torn from her skirt. Pike's hat appeared at the chimney top first, then his grinning face. "Got you cornered good now, Mrs. Hale. Drop the iron, and we'll let you walk." Lies dripped thick as honey. Margaret kept working the lashings, fingers raw. Tall Bear watched her, understanding dawning. "You first," he insisted. She tied the last knot, tested the crude rope, thin, green, likely to snap. Boots scraped closer along the bench. Cole Brennan stepped into view, rifle raised, eyes uncertain when they met hers. "Ma'am, it doesn't have to end badly," he called, voice cracking young. Margaret met his gaze steadily. "Tell that to my husband's grave." She looped the branch rope around a cedar trunk, tossed the end over the drop. Tall Bear went first despite protest, lowering hand over hand while she braced the trunk with her weight. Wood creaked, fibers groaned. Halfway down, a branch snapped, and he swung free, slamming against rock. Blood bloomed fresh, but he kept descending until he vanished into scrub below. Margaret followed, arms screaming, palms shredding on rough bark. A shout above, Pike firing wildly down the cliff face. Bullets chipped stone near her head. One burned across her shoulder like a branding iron. She dropped the last 10 feet, landing hard beside Tall Bear in a dry wash hidden by mesquite. He was on his feet already, pulling her up. "Run now," he rasped. Behind them, curses echoed as the posse realized their quarry had slipped the noose again. They staggered into the maze of side canyons, sun hammering mercilessly, blood trail marking every step. Margaret knew the desert would claim them soon if help didn't come, yet the spark of defiance still burned hotter than fever. Far above, vultures banked tighter, waiting for the inevitable fall. The vultures hung lower now, shadows flickering across the floor of the narrow wash as Margaret and Tall Bear pushed deeper into the canyon maze. Blood loss slowed his steps to a determined stagger, and every lean on her shoulder transferred the heat of his fever like a branding iron against her side. Shouts echoed closer off the red rock walls. Pike's posse had picked up their blood trail and was closing fast on foot, rifles ready for the kill. They rounded a sharp bend into a dead-end box canyon, walls soaring sheer on all sides, with only the entrance at their backs. Margaret's breath caught hard. The desert had herded them into its perfect ambush. Sun baked the sandy floor mercilessly, reflecting heat in waves that blurred the air, while even shade offered no relief. Tall Bear slid down the wall to sit, knife still gripped tight, eyes scanning the approach. Dust boiled at the canyon mouth as the posse filed in. 12 men now, Crawford leading with shotgun loose in his hands, face flushed dark with triumph. "Ring complete," he shouted, waving men to spread along the walls. Boots crunched forward in a tightening noose. Escape routes vanished one by one. Margaret crouched low, Colt heavy in her grip with only 3 rounds remaining. Tall Bear met her gaze steadily, acceptance settling over his features like trail dust. "I go out alone," he said low. "Draw their fire. You slip the back wall when they bunch." She shook her head sharply. "No splitting now. We end it together, or not at all." A faint nod answered her, respect flashing briefly in his eyes. Crawford halted the line 30 yards out, men fanning behind boulders for cover. "Throw down the iron, Mrs. Hale," he called, voice amplified by the canyon. "Walk out slow, and we'll forget your treason." "Savage stays." The promise rang false as tin. Margaret saw Pike grinning beside him, thigh bandaged, but hate burning hot. Cole Brennan hung at the edge, rifle lowered, uncertain. She rose slowly into the open, Colt visible, but not raised. "You want him? Come take him," she answered clearly. Laughter rippled mean through the posse, triggers easing back. Tall Bear pushed upright beside her, swaying yet defiant, knife reversed for throwing. The two stood shoulder to shoulder, widow and warrior, facing the line that represented every broken treaty and stolen acre. Crawford's mouth twisted ugly. Stubborn to the end. Fine, light 'em both. Rifles rose in unison. In that frozen heartbeat, Tall Bear stepped forward alone, arms wide, drawing every barrel to himself. "You fear what you cage," he shouted, voice ringing off stone like a challenge from ancestors. "Kill me. The land still knows your theft." Shots cracked, staggered, smoke blooming thick. Bullets tugged his body, spinning him once, yet he kept walking 3 impossible steps before dropping to his knees. Margaret's Colt barked twice. Crawford's hat spun away. Pike clutched a sudden arm wound and dove for cover. Chaos rippled the line. Men hesitated at the sight of a dying man advancing unarmed. Tall Bear fell forward at last. Face in the sand, he'd defended all his life. Body finally still, but unchained. Silence slammed down, broken only by powder smoke drifting lazily. Crawford levered his shotgun, turning toward Margaret, exposed and empty-handed. "Your turn," he snarled. But the posse shifted uneasily behind him. Cole staring horrified at the body, others glancing at the cairn-like rocks where shadows seemed to gather. No one raised a weapon quickly. Crawford spat a curse, lowered the barrels fractionally. "Ain't worth the powder for a crazy woman," he muttered loudly. "Let buzzards have her." He backed toward the entrance, waving men to mount up. They rode out slower than they'd come, dust settling in their wake like regret. Margaret dropped beside Tall Bear, hands pressing uselessly against wounds too many. His eyes found hers one final time, spark holding. Truth. Walks free now, he whispered, then went slack under the vast sky. Night swept cold and sudden across the canyon. She dug a shallow grave with a knife and her hands, piling stones high in Comanche fashion so coyotes couldn't scatter him. Dawn found her walking east alone, skirt bloodied, face sun-blistered, carrying empty Colt and memory heavier than lead. Red Willow heard versions later. Savage, dead final. The widow vanished mad into the desert. Yet riders skirted that box canyon thereafter. Some claimed echoes of war cries on the wind, shadows moving wrong. Margaret's trail faded into wider territories where new fights brewed. But the story she carried, one act of defiance against iron and greed, took root quietly, growing like creosote after rare rain, a legacy no bullet or cage could ever bury. The dust has settled on that blood-soaked canyon, but the echo of one widow's choice still rides the desert wind. Margaret Hale walked away carrying a truth heavier than any grave, proof that courage isn't always loud, and justice sometimes starts with a single knife cutting iron. What about you? Was Margaret right to risk everything for a man the world called an enemy? Or should she have saved herself and stayed silent? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I truly want to know what this story stirred in you. Rate it 0 to 10. Tell me where you're watching from, and let's talk. Your support means the world, so thank you for staying till the end. More raw, unforgettable tales are coming soon. See you in the next one. Don't miss it.